Hi, welcome to a short presentation that just explains why Pervade Software's architecture is ideal for tackling big data. Basically, let's start by saying, what is big data? Big data was first highlighted and penned by the Gartner analyst Doug Laney way back in 2001, and he identified that there were three characteristics of data that would qualify it as being big. The first being this increasing volume of data that systems are having to cope with. The second being the speed or velocity of data in and out of the various systems in our infrastructures. And the third is the sheer new variety of data types and sources that was emerging. So he coined this phrase volume, velocity, variety, and those three V's combine to give you what we think of today as big data. 11 years later, Gartner is still following the same mantra. This was the definition that they gave in a report in 2012. They said big data are high volume, high velocity, and or high variety information assets that require new forms of processing to enable enhanced decision making, insight discovery, and process optimization. And the key here is this new forms of processing to be able to cope with the big data challenge. So let's just take a look at each of these one at a time and see how the Pervade software copes with it. So the first one is high volume. We really are creating more and more and more data from lots of different sources every single day, and the numbers are staggering. If you just take something like 2.5 quintillion bytes of data every day, 90% of the data that exists today across the whole world was created in just the last 2 years. And what that means is that the world's data itself is doubling every 24 months. Which is a frightening set of statistics. It just means that this big problem that we think of as big data is only going to get bigger as time goes by. So what we're going to do, just to pin this down a little bit more, is we're going to use a use case. We're going to take the monitoring of web servers as our ideal example of what do we mean by big data. If you're monitoring web servers effectively, it means that you want to be checking their availability. You've got to be checking the status of the services that are running. You want the performance metrics. You want file integrity data on the back end. You want configuration information on those devices. And of course, the big beast log data. Now, each of these comes kicking its way in from each of these web servers in various volumes. The challenge is that despite each of these data queries producing relatively small amounts, when you start adding them together and then you multiply this by large farms of web servers, the resulting data can be hundreds and hundreds of megabytes per day from each one. So let's just take a look at how a monitoring system is going to deal with this, because monitoring systems typically slow down if they try to retain too much data. And here's the problem. So if we take a look at the Pervade system is not going to suffer in the same way. And the secret sauce under the bonnet of the product is an object persistent database. So relational databases such as the Oracles, the Microsofts, etc., they're all limited in the amount of data they can import and export and analyze. And they're limited the applications that sit on them as well, because using a relational database, those applications can only run as quickly as they can construct and deconstruct data in and out of those pre-structured database tables. It's very easy to see how when the volume of data that needs to be processed increases and your ability to process that data is limited by this relational database structure, there's going to be a crossover point. At some point in the volumes of the systems that you're trying to monitor, you'll get swamped. So the Pervade system, by using a database that writes to disk and reads from disk in the form of objects, not in the form of relational tables, means that the system, the platform, never needs to construct and deconstruct that data. So we can take all of that processing and time out of the equation. And by storing data and objects in this way, the speed of the application data is only limited by the hardware that it's sitting on. There is no software limit to how much data can be processed by the Pervade system. So let's take a look at the second challenge. The second challenge is velocity. It's about the speed that this data moves at. Log monitoring systems probably provide the best metrics for high-end performance, and the highest performing systems in the market today in this space are, let's take a look at the biggest and the fastest. It's a system called ArcSight from HP. And that can believe, if you can believe it, can receive 10 10,000 events per second, and it can keep data for up to 90 days. 10,000 events per second. If you just take a look at the next closest running system, as you can see, there's a big gap here between the ArcSight and the Envision system from RSA, which can receive 7,500 events per second, although that can also keep data online for 90 days. I could go on with describing the speeds and feeds of the various systems available, but these are the two fastest systems on the market. So let's take a look at our web monitoring use case. We've already said that the web servers produce availability data. This can come in at 50 kilobits per minute. Performance data, also around the same number. OS logs might be, say, 10 logs per second from the OS. And the application logs, you might increase that to around 50 events per second, as well as the scheduled file integrity monitoring, config data that needs checking, etc. It all starts to add up. The average log is about 200 bytes. Each server therefore produces around about 45 meg of data per hour. But in an organization with 1,000 web servers, do the maths. This very quickly can elevate up to around 60,000 events per second. That's 6 times more data, or 6 times faster data, than the market leader currently can deal with. ArcSight itself, at 10,000 events per second, you would have to buy 6 ArcSights to be able to cope with the data that these web servers are throwing out. There's the problem with the velocity. So how does Pervade Software operate differently? Pervade Software has a unique parsing engine. And the unique parsing engine means that most of the processing is actually done on the data collector section of the process rather than on the correlation engine and the central server. So if it's done on the data collector, you combine this capability with the object persistent database we mentioned earlier, which does not require data to be churned in and out and deconstructed and constructed in and out of tables. The Pervade system can easily receive and process over 60,000 events per second, and we've got customers right now running at these kind of speeds with a single system. And if you add to that the fact that the Pervade architecture allows for the central processing server to be clustered as well, you can support even larger deployments of data. So there's no slowdown. Unlike most systems, data can be kept online for as long as the disk space is available. So remember, with this object persistent database, the actual amount of data in the system does not slow down the rate at which the system can receive, process, or report on data. So we have a unique parsing engine structure that solves these speed problems. And actually, we now have a system that is 6, 7, 8 times faster than the market leader in the marketplace. So the third challenge that was described by Gartner was the sheer variety of data types and sources. And this high variety problem is getting worse and worse every day. All monitoring systems available today will only cater for a limited number of data types. And that's because when you're developing a monitoring system, the developers themselves need to know the format to write the analytics algorithms. They have to write separate scripts for every data type, and they might have to write those across multiple vendors. So for example, performance data that comes out of most systems, it's usually about 200 characters, and it's usually an integer. If you looked at availability data, that's much smaller. It's only 5 characters. It's also an integer. But if you looked at log data comes out usually in the form of a string, and it can be up to 500 characters. But config data, that's completely unpredictable. It's usually a string, but this could be a 1,000-line config file of a firewall. So if you look at our case study again and the monitoring of a simple web server, we've already said that all of these different data types have to be taken into consideration when effectively monitoring web servers. You want to know about availability, service status, performance, config, and you want to be looking and correlating those logs. So all of these different data types in all of these different formats. Every vendor has also got multiple formats for each of their different range of products. So if you multiply the data type by the number of vendors that you might have in your web server farm, then you really do have an enormous confusion of data types. True actionable intelligence from all of this data, it requires every one of these data types to be correlated as well as collected. And there are no systems available currently that can correlate such a disparate set of data types until you start to look at the Pervade software architecture. Remember, we've got two disparate pieces of software working together. We have a data collector, and the data collector is able to collect from a vast array of data types. It can do all of the data types we've previously mentioned. And it can also take data directly from devices or pull them out of other third-party spreadsheets, third-party systems, or even from spreadsheets and files. So if we can pull all of that in, with the system then allows you to build your own queries and data sets. So that variety of data that can be collected is almost limitless in the way that you can collect it. And if you combine that with the system analyzer engine, it means that the analyzer engine allows you to parse all of those various data types at lightning speeds, but also correlate them and aggregate them together. Remember, they're all objects in our database. They're not relational. We don't have to pre-write the coding for how those things are structured. We simply treat them all as objects. So the reporting, forensic searching, all of that, it's irrespective of size and format for us. Everything's simply an object. And users can build their own rules and their own displays and combine as many data types on a single screen as they please. So this provides true, genuine situational awareness. I have a screenshot here. Let's just blow this up and take a larger look at it. You can see immediately on this one screen, this one dashboard, we're showing round trip data, we're showing availability data, we're showing CPU usage and disk space, and we're also showing outages. I can combine whatever graphs and charts I want from on this screen, availability and performance, but I could equally put config, asset, log management, I can put flow data, you name it. I can combine all of these various data types, correlate them together in any way I want, and display them onto a dashboard of my own choosing. So we've talked about the three main problems with big data, but let's just take a look now at the biggest myth that surrounds big data. Because currently, I'm going back to Gartner and I'm showing you the product rating chart that lists all of the various monitoring products and solutions that you might want to use and how Gartner rates them. This is the big myth. You need a big system to handle big data. It's just not true. These large systems, as we've seen by the speeds and the limits in their data types, they're just too cumbersome to be able to sift through large volumes of data. They're too slow to cope with the speed that data comes in. Remember that 10,000 events per second limit when most web farms are dealing with 40, 50, 60,000 events per second. And they're just too limited to handle the growing variety of data types. So they will have a very limited number of data types they can deal with. And if you want to deal with the broad range of data types, you're buying multiple systems. So all of these so-called big systems are failing. Their architecture gets swamped. So Pervade Software is a new architecture for a new task, and it's to tackle big data. It's a clever system. It can target exactly the right data from within huge volumes. It is lightning fast. It is able to cope with at least 6 times the velocity of any other system on the marketplace. And it's versatile because it can handle the widest variety of data types available on the market today. So the big myth, there is in fact a big truth that underpins this. You don't need a big system. You need a targeted system. You need a system that can pluck a wide variety of different data types out of a high-speed data flows and from within huge volumes, and then give you the freedom to analyze it and give you actionable information out of the back of it. So, Pervade Systems, Pervade Software, we think they're a new kind of monitoring system for a new kind of problem, big data. Take a look at the system today, see what you think.